Welcome to the Shoulda Bet More podcast presented by Gold Boys. Coming up on the show, Dave Ross of Bet on Chicago and VSiN will join us. Talk a little bit of everything with Dave. He's a big Mets fan, and the Mets were a story this week with all of their blown leads. So we'll talk to him about the Mets, his Cowboys, his thoughts on the NBA, NHL, and NFL, get his thoughts on some golf, the U.S. Open coming up. So excited to talk to Dave as it is Memorial Day, and for some reason, not everybody's playing. The Yankees, who have been on fire, a bad loss on Sunday to the Padres. Torres makes an error, and he's a terrible defensive player. A couple walks, and an inning implodes on them. But they've been playing extremely well otherwise. But how the Yankees are not playing on Memorial Day is just ridiculous. It's just another example of how baseball just can't get out of its own way. The reason the NFL is so popular, they flood the airwaves with their sport. Their sport is constantly on every night of the week. It's on when you can watch it. They don't have games going until midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. Their playoff games run at reasonable time. All of their games run at reasonable time. And they make the sports available where you can watch them, and they make it, they market their sport in baseball on a Memorial Day where everybody's off, everybody's home, or most people are off, most people are home. How everybody's not playing is just completely beyond me, just completely ridiculous. Most teams are playing. We do have a bunch of games, but Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, these are days. I mean, you should have double headers, if anything. These are days where everybody should be playing. So just completely ridiculous. Another example of baseball just not being able to get out of its own way. Out of all these games, I will say that the Dodgers against the Mets, and we'll get to the Mets here in a minute because they've been a disaster. That's one I like. Minus 148 here against the Mets. Stone going against McGill. The Dodgers, I mean, look, I know they haven't played great, but the Mets just can't get out of their own way. I know they won on Sunday, but they have no closer. Diaz has been a complete disaster. And to think of where they were 2 years ago with Showalter on their way to 100+ wins, to blow that division, lose to the Padres, everything is completely imploded around them since. And they're just this weird position where they're not a contender. They're not really rebuilding. They're just a mess. But Dodgers, to me, that price looks a little cheap in the minus 148 range. Of course, shop around, make sure you get the best number. If you can find a book that has these dime lines, that is very important. That's one that sticks out to me. But other than that, you get some weird interleague games. Guardians, Rockies, Orioles do play the Red Sox. Red Sox have come back to life a little bit this last week or 2 weeks, where they started out hot, but they just don't have the talent to really, compete in this AL East, and maybe not even compete for a wild card. They are, I would say, a 500 team at best going forward. So you get Giants, Phillies. Phillies have played well. Actually lost 2 out of 3 to the Rockies. Acuna got hurt for the Braves. So some of those are the themes here of baseball. Really, the two New York teams are the theme of this past week or so, with the Yankees just dominating with Judge and Soto. And when you got two guys as good as Judge and Soto, one of them is going to be hot at all times. And when they're both hot, look out, because you still have the other guys like Stanton and Rizzo, and Volpe's developed into a tremendous player, an all-star level player. Verdugo, they're just a really good, really deep team. And they pitched well. So bad loss Sunday against the Padres, but the Yankees have been a big theme here. In the Mets, again, just a complete disaster. And really, this is a team that could be like a 500 team, but Diaz has single-handedly cost them about 5 or 6 games. And that's really the biggest difference, is the gap between what you expected from Diaz and what you're getting. And they are just a complete nightmare. And really, anything's on the table, I think, with the Mets. Alonso, I don't think you can possibly afford Lindor unless you're willing to eat half, if not more, of that contract. Maybe Nimmo. I mean, somebody would give you something for Severino and JD Martinez. I don't know what you get for Diaz at this point. No point in selling low. So those are a couple of themes here as we head into Memorial Day, the first kind of check-in point of baseball season. Braves have not played great. Acuna went down with an injury on Sunday. We'll keep an eye on that. So should be a fun summer with some of these pennant races. AL East should be a good race between the Yankees and the Orioles. NL East, Braves and Phillies. AL West is quietly a disaster, with the Mariners not really playing that well, only a game or two over 500. Houston trying to chase them down. Texas has not played well as the defending champion. So we will have all summer to talk about baseball. Quickly on the basketball, if it does end up being a Celtics Mavericks final here, this line is projected to be Celtics minus 280, Mavs plus 230. That seems a little high, so we'll see if that does end up being the matchup. The one game for Monday, I would expect the Eastern Conference playoffs to come to an end. Is just a joke of a path. I can't remember a path, an entire bracket breaking in such a way where Boston has not even been close to tested. These teams weren't that good to begin with, and they're losing all their best players. Jimmy Butler for the Heat, the Cavs losing all their players. And then Halliburton gets hurt for the Pacers. So the Celtics are going to walk into a final here, whether it's game 4 or game 5. I actually think Indiana, there's a possibility they mail it in game 4. They blew game 1. They gave game 1 and game 3 away. Plus, they lost their best player. So I don't know that there's a ton of incentive, a ton of motivation for Indiana to come out here and say, hey, let's rally the troops and let's find our way back to Boston for game 5. Their belief has to be waning here. I do worry if I'm Indiana or if I'm back in Indiana that they've checked out a little bit. You never completely trust Boston, especially when things are going well, but they're a little bit of a bully. So maybe, they have one of their performances where they bank a bunch of threes and win by 20, and Indiana just kind of folds their tent. And especially if Indiana gets down early, I don't know that they're going to have a lot of belief and a lot of will to fight back. So some baseball, not enough. We get basketball, we get hockey. As we head towards the summer, Memorial Day, we will discuss all of this and more with Dave Ross. That is next. This is the Shoulda Bet More podcast. All right, we are back. Shoulda Bet More podcast. Excited, a first-time guest. He is the host of Sunday Bet Prep. You can hear him all over VSiN, Bet on Chicago. He joins me now. It is Dave Ross. Dave, what's up, man? Thanks for coming on.
Well, for you, my friend, anything. Always love our chats. It's so bizarre because what are you, about 6'5"? Is that what you go?
No, I'm barely 6 feet.
No way, because when we met in person, when you came to Vegas, because I'm small, right? I'm a legit, but my ID says 5'9", but I think closer to the spectrum would be 5'7" and 3/4. Like you and I could be like that odd couple, like the Danny DeVito Schwarzenegger twins back in the day. Like when you came in, I thought like you were a giant human being. Am I just really that small?
I think, here's what I think's going on. I think you're trying to butter me up because I'm going to ask you about the Mets and you're trying to steer the subject somewhere else because you are a Mets fan. You're a Cowboys fan. We'll get to some golf and some UFC. But hey, if it leads, it bleeds. We have to talk about the Mets. If they were 500 or a couple games under, we wouldn't. But it's been so bad. They've lost in such horrific ways that I need to get your thoughts. Are you discouraged with Steve Cohen and the direction this is going? Let me put it this way. If I put you in charge there and said, hey, Steve Cohen called you and he wants to know what Dave Ross would do going forward, would you just trade everybody and rebuild? Just where are you here with the Mets and what would you do going forward?
Okay, I would not sell, but I will tell you this, and you know this because I've told you this before. I'm in a group text with some of my dear buddies for decades. The group text is called Meet the Mess. This morning, and like you will do to me, you'll send me some mean text messages and rough way to start the day sometime. So my buddy in Meet the Mess sends this out to the group text. It's a text this morning from the owner, Steve Cohen. Not sure if you saw it, but I will read it to you, Will, right here. He said, what a stretch, mind-boggling. I know how disheartening this is for you as our fans. Thank you, TY, for caring so much. And I just responded, what the bleep is that? Why is Steve Cohen now trying to get into my feelings as a Metropolitan fan of like, hey, thank you for caring? Because if it didn't hurt, it meant you didn't care. Okay, we do care, but I'm getting to the point of apathy. And well, there's nothing worse in the world of sports, and certainly as a bettor, than actually, it's not a bad way to be as a bettor, is apathetic. Because if you do not have feelings, you can approach things a little bit more crystal clear. Right now, I'm not in a good headspace when it comes to the Mets. If Steve Cohen called me tomorrow and said, we need you to come in here and right the ship, what would you do? I got to start looking at Frankie Lindor and saying, can I move his salary? Now, Cohen's a guy with an open pocketbook. We understand that. This is not small market. This is still New York City. This is still the Mets. And I know that was the bane of the Yankees' existence for the last couple of years with you. It was like, hey, you're a big market team. Act like it. The Mets did. I mean, I can't lay this at the feet of Steve Cohen. He went out there and tried to make moves, get pitching, buy pitching, and buy the necessary assets to make this a winning team. And it looked like they were on the cusp last year. It all went to hell in a handbasket. He decided to trade everybody, at least, Scherzer and DeGrom, and really start anew. Well, does that mean that you keep going? Yeah, if I can move Lindor, I would. The Alonso one is the tricky one for me because he really is a piece. He does bleed blue and orange right now. I think he wants to be a Met forever. And is it going to be depreciating returns if you move these guys now? Probably. I don't think you get a fair market value for what you would have gotten this time last year for these guys. So right now, I wouldn't necessarily sell everybody, but if I can move a guy like Frankie Lindor and that salary, that might be one I move and start to really try to figure out what we can do in 2025. Because, Will, there is no visions of grandeur. We talked about it. They're 5-1 to make the postseason this year. That should be 10-1. Like, there's no realm of possibility that I see that this is a playoff team this year in 2024. So to that end, if you're being a good GM, if you're being a realistic owner, you try to get better for next year, not this year.
Yeah, and that's what's tricky too, is you even look towards next year, say, hey, how realistic is it that I'm that much better next year with this pitching? Like, okay, maybe I get Senga back. He was good last year. You have to have concerns about his injuries, but do I have enough pitching where if things break right, I can even compete next year? And if the answer is no, then boy, I really have to, ask myself some questions about Alonso. I don't even know what you get for Diaz at this point. You never want to sell low like that. So,
Right.
you never want to be in between. And the Mets are just a weird team where some of these, they have older players like Alonso, who's in his prime, Lindor, who's older, Diaz is older. And then they have, these young prospects who, supposedly are pretty good in the minors. So I don't know. And Cohen likes to let you know that he's one of the fans. He grew up a Mets fan. So he's trying to be one of the fans. He's trying to get through to
Is
you
that
that
what that
way.
text
But
is?
I think that's what that
yeah.
is. I think that's what it is.
Well, I do look at it and I go, when I see Zach Wheeler pitching for the Phillies as an ace, co-ace, whatever you want to make him these days, the Mets had an option. They could have given him the bag back in the day, and they elected not to. So I think they've made some decisions that we look back 3 years ago that don't look like good decisions today. And that's where a lot of this stems from, right? Is you kind of place some value in some older players. Look, when they went for Max and they got him from LA, I went, okay, you're pushing chips in. I get it. But they eschewed the youth movement. When the veteran route doesn't work, and DeGrom just couldn't stay healthy, it's the same thing in Texas for him. And, I think Jacob DeGrom will be one of those guys we look back in 10 years at the barbershop and go, what could have been? That guy could have been one of the best pitchers. He was one of the best pitchers of our generation. I don't know if we'll ever see that realized again. But those are the guys you rolled. Those are the guys you went to the dance with. The older Frankie Lindors, the Alonso in his prime, and tried to make that work, and it didn't work. Even the Martes, right? We're trying to go with guys like that to build around those superstars. And the sum of the parts did not equal up to what the Mets thought they would be. Now, is there a Paul Skeens out there? Like, can you go that route and go find that guy? Even I'm going to go back to my DC days when the Nationals drafted Bryce Harper's and Steven Strasburg back-to-back years. I mean, that's what it takes to ultimately get back into a championship hunt. And even though the Nats didn't win it with Bryce Harper, he kind of set the table for some of those guys to win a championship. That's what it takes. I don't think, Will, you can keep going the old 80s Yankees route and the Danny Tartables of the world and and keep trying to go old and buy all this talent. It didn't work for the Yankees then. It took the farm system for the Yanks and the Derek Jeters to come along in the 90s to make it work. I think in this generation, the Mets have to find their Paul Skeens. They got to go find somebody like that in the draft, because I just don't know you can go acquire talent that's already out there and put this thing back together.
Yeah, and that's the problem. That's what I mean when you're in between, because you're not going to be at the top of the draft to be picking one or two. They still have enough Nimos, Alonsos, Lindors, Alvarez when he's back. They have enough talent to just be okay and win their, like, I don't know, 70 games. What are the Mets going to win? That's a good question. 70 and 92, 72 and 90. I actually thought they'd be 500, and I think they might have been if Diaz was what we thought, because Diaz has single-handedly, lost them 5 or 6 games. Are you surprised how bad Lindor has been when you got him, 2-3 years ago?
Absolutely. And it's something I told you about. My buddy Brandon Geyer, who played with the Indians back in the day where they played in the World Series against the Cubs. And Brandon and I are good buds. And he came to Chicago when I was in Chicago then, and he's still with Cleveland. And, gets me down there. Me and my friends were on the field talking with Terry Francona, and introduces me to Francisco Lindor. And this is the young stud at the time. And I talked to Brandon just kind of away from Frankie. And he's like, the energy this guy has, like, it's contagious in the ballpark. And he had this exuberance of youth about him. And I wonder, with the rigors of New York, if that's been beaten out of him. And I know he's still smiling, and I know he still has that, but it looks like that game has not necessarily translated from Cleveland to New York. We've seen it before from guys from Cleveland to New York, right? The Robbie Alomars, the Carlos Baergas. If you go back through Mets history, for some reason, middle infielders leaving Cleveland and going to New York to play for the Metropolitans has not worked out the way we thought it would. I got to be honest with you. I thought it was a slam dunk. I go back to the Omar Minaya days as the GM when he overpaid for Pedro Martinez. And I went, well, he had to do it, because that led to, the Delgados of the world and some of the other players to help get and attract other free agents. And I thought that was going to be the case with Francisco Lindor to New York. You overpaid for Frankie then, and maybe it opens up the door to go get somebody else that says, I want to play with this guy. I don't know in 2024 if people are clamoring to play with Francisco Lindor. I mean, that's just, I think people would go, oh, I wouldn't mind it, but I don't think they're beating down the door the way I thought they would 5 years ago to get to New York and become part of a championship team. If you would ask me this question 5, 6 years ago, I would have said, absolutely, it's the right move. It's the necessary move. It's just a move that has not panned out. And that's clear to see. And it is surprising to me.
Yep, totally agree. Switching gears here. If it is a Celtics Mavs final and we have like a week layoff, first of all, what kind of what's your level of interest if that's the final, and how much do you think a layoff would hurt?
All right, you and I are junkies, so I'm still going to be intrigued. And by the way, I'm intrigued by, at this stage of my sports fandom and betting, I'm intrigued by storylines, right? And so you go, well, what's the storyline there? There is a storyline with Kyrie in Boston, and we know that hatred probably exists there. But the intriguing storyline to me now, it's Luka. I mean, it's not so much, we know the story. Like, in my group text with guys in our business like Michael Kim and Tyler Fulgham and Brian McFadden at CBS, they're just texting, he's a killer. He's a killer. He's a dog. And then, Tyler's like, he's been that. And I'm like, yeah, this has always been who Luka is. But now when you see it on a big stage, like, it's not that he hits the 3 to beat the T-Wolves and that 18-point comeback in game 2. It's the taunting of Rudy Gobert. Like the unnecessary riding of Frenchie, right? He just felt like it was personal. And you go, where does that come from? Like, what is that? That's the stuff that I love. Like, I love the dog in athletes, the killers. Like, we all thought Anthony Edwards was going to be that next Kobe, Michael basketball killer. It might be Luka. We might have forgotten because, I don't know, maybe he's European and maybe he looks like a nice guy. That guy's a killer, man. He wants to rip your freaking heart out. And those are the type of athletes I want to see on the biggest stage. Does Jason Tatum have that? Like Tatum is that passive superstar talent. Nobody doubts the talent of that guy. But man, if you're getting down to a chip and we're talking about legacy, I've got a ticket plus 625 for Dallas to win the NBA Finals. I made that before the Western Conference Final. It wasn't like I made it before the playoffs started. It waited till I saw the way it started to evolve. And I thought, if they bounced OKC for some of the same reasons I think they're going to bounce Minnesota, it's one and the same. Young teams that are not ready to get over the hump. I think you could almost make the same case for Boston. Are they ready to get over the hump? Because I'll tell you this, Kyrie Irving, say whatever you want to say about Kyrie. That dude is a second point guard with Luka, and he is so smart as he's gotten. I think he's better now. I know the shot with Cleveland to help beat Golden State and LeBron back in the day when they won that. That was raw talent by Kyrie. I don't think he had maturated into the player he is now. I think they're really dangerous for Boston because Boston goes through the stretches where they don't play defense. They just don't play defense. And to me, I think Dallas will be able to utilize that. They got young bigs, certainly Gafford and Lively, that I think will be just that. Celtics better hope they get Zinger back and Porzingis is back to looking like the way he looked pre-injury. Because if not, I think Dallas is going to give them all they can handle. I think that's easily a 6-7 game series.
Yep, I agree. And the look ahead line has Boston minus 280, Dallas plus 230. I can't imagine that line stays because I know the computers are going to spit out with Boston's regular season data. And look, as much as we aren't impressed with them in the playoffs, they are, heading into Monday here, they are 11-2 in the playoffs, which it doesn't feel that way, but you have to take it on. You have to grade it on a curve, a grain of salt, because they're playing all these teams without their best players.
Yeah.
So the numbers are going to spit out a certain number on Boston, a power rating that's going to put them ahead of Dallas. I understand that, but boy, that seems heavy, doesn't it? That does just seem like it seems like it's too much.
There's something to be said for being battle tested. And tell me that Dallas isn't going through wars right now. I will say this. I'm a little concerned about Luka's knee. I don't know how he's doing it, Will. I got to be honest with you. I'm so glad I didn't do this. In game 2, they went up, I think it was 7 or 9-2 early in game 2 in Minnesota. But you could see Luka's knee wasn't right. I almost live bet the Wolves at that point. Right? Because you could have got about a pick'em price at that point. And boy, would I have been pissed off with that 3 by Luka late to win the game. Because I just thought he can't, like, how is he doing this? So yes, everybody's hurt this time of year in the NBA, and we're seeing that. It really is a weird thing. It's been a war of attrition in the NBA playoffs. I mean, from the first round through where we are, as you mentioned it, Boston getting the benefit of the doubt here, but even they have injuries with Porzingis, as I mentioned. So if Luka is 100%, I think Dallas wins the series. I'm 1,000% convinced they win this series if he is right. But that does worry me because how much can he keep gutting out these games with the knee? And then maybe the 9 days off, if they get there, maybe if they can potentially sweep the series with Minnesota, that would really play to their benefit to get Luka right. And then I'd like to see what he looks like at full strength because I really do. I love what they did at the trade deadline, going to get PJ Washington and getting Daniel Gafford. Those are the subtle moves that you at the time. Who's excited about that? Who's going, oh, yeah, Dallas to win the championship. Now they got PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford.
Great point.
Those are the small moves that are made at the deadline that show themselves in the postseason. And they're really showing themselves for Dallas. They're a little bit deeper than people thought. Jones is the type of that, high riser and can knock down threes, 3-and-D type guy. So I think they've got all the pieces. And if Boston just looks lackadaisical, as they tend to do, they're going to not give away. They'll lose at least 2 games. I think 3 and potentially 4.
Your other team is the Cowboys, America's team.
Not my team. Our team, Will.
There is a narrative, and I think the odds kind of agree with this. But Dallas was the favorite in the division before the draft, free agency. I think there's a narrative now that that's flipped where Philly's the better team, good draft. They had Barkley, and Dallas has kind of stayed static. Do you object to that? Do you agree with that? Where are you with the Cowboys here?
Could this ever be played back later on in the season? This Shoulda Bet More podcast, or can we burn this part of the conversation for all of eternity?
Yeah, we can burn it if it doesn't go well for you. Absolutely.
Fair enough. I would advise people that watch us on VSiN and other places. If you made me bet it, I'd bet the Eagles. I would. It's the same advice I gave 2 years ago before the draft. And I didn't know they were going to go get AJ Brown in that draft day trade. If you remember that a couple of years ago, at that point going into the draft, the Eagles were 3-1 plus 300 to win the division. I remember it very well. Dallas coming off the division championship the year before. And I went, whoa, why are the Eagles 3-1 dogs? Once they made that trade, drafted really well that year, that number got shorted. I think they ended up about plus $1.75. Of course, they go on to win the division that year. And I advised people on the network at that time, the value play was in the Eagles. I thought the value play was in the Cowboys this time last year at about the same price. I got them at plus $1.80 this time last year to win the NFC East. And then what else I did, and you know this, I took them at 10-1 when the Eagles were 10-1 after through 11 games. And I looked at the rest of the schedule. I thought they were kind of fugazi a little bit. I didn't know that they'd hit the iceberg. The Titanic would hit it as hard as the Eagles did at the end of the stretch last year. But to go from 10-1 to 11-6 and flame out in the first round of the playoffs is hard to do. Now, why would I like the Eagles this time after that implosion at the end of the year? The coordinators. I'm not a Kellen Moore guy, as you well know, as a Dallas Cowboy guy. And I laughed at everybody when he went to the Chargers last year, and everybody laughed at me and said, oh, you guys, now Mike McCarthy's calling plays. Your offense is going to struggle. Kellen Moore was the reason. Kellen Moore was I was like, no. Y'all are not paying attention. Mike McCarthy, Dak Prescott had a breakout year last year without Kellen Moore. He flamed out in LA with the Chargers, but now he's in Philly. And if he can check his ego, and I think he'll be a better coordinator because of the struggles he had in LA last year, and Vic Fangio coming over to coach that defense, I think Nick Sirianni has adults in the room now. I know he's got one in Vic, and I know Vic from Chicago. That dude doesn't take a whole lot of guff, okay? And, you saw the defense implode last year. I'd be really surprised if their defense plays down to the level that they played at the end of the year. That's not good news for me as a Cowboy backer, because now with adults, and I will be fascinated to see the way Kellen Moore utilizes Saquon Barkley. If he utilizes him properly out of the backfield, and to me properly is as another guy that linebackers and safeties have to counter in space. That's the way I do it. Use him as an every down running back. Fine. Jalen Hurts hands the ball off to Barkley 20 times. Cool. I'm with that. What I don't want is 15 times and he touches the ball 7 more as a pass catcher in spaces where I fear Saquon Barkley. I don't fear him, and maybe I should a little bit more. I don't fear him and the rest of the NFC East if they use him as a, plodding back to try to get to that 3 yards. And I want him to be dynamic If Kellen Moore utilizes Saquon properly, it should open up things down the field for Devonta Smith and for AJ Brown. They've got weapons. Can you utilize them properly? And then the $1 million question is, who is Jalen Hurts? I like Jalen Hurts a lot more than other people do in our space. So that's why if you made me wager it, which I will not, I would bet the Eagles at plus money to win the division.
It'll be interesting with Jerry Jones because the Texas Rangers are the defending World Series champions. The Dallas Stars are in the conference finals.
Stop it.
And the Dallas Mavericks might be headed to the NBA finals. Do you think Jerry Jones sees this environment around him and almost feels like an animal that's cornered and feels like he has to do something drastic, act out? Do you think that has an effect?
What is that, Will?
No?
What is act out?
I'm not sure.
Drastic. What could Jerry Jones do at this stage? Like, there's nothing that's going to happen between now and training camp and the start of the season for the Cowboys. I know everybody's getting on Jera because he said we're all in. Like, we're going all in this year. Well, all in is re-signing his guys, and he hasn't done that yet. But really, all in for me, it's the big three. It's Dak, it's CeeDee Lamb, it's Micah Parsons. They've got to figure out a way, and really, this doesn't fall as much on Jera as it does Stephen Jones, and figuring out a way to work those contracts. If you get those guys in tow, that's better than any free agents. Cowboys have done such a good job of drafting, Will. I really think they've done a great job over the last decade, primarily, that it gets down to retaining their own. It's not stealing somebody else's stuff. Look, when they made the trade for Amari Cooper many moons ago and gave up a first-round pick, that really began the ascension of Dak Prescott. He got a trusted guy that he can now count on as a professional receiver to be where he wants to be. Now, he was going to make $20 million. That's why they let him walk to Cleveland in exchange for a 6th-round pick a couple of years ago. I'm not worried about the wide receiver room. I am worried a little bit about the offensive linemen. And Tyron Smith got older. Tyler Biadasz is now in D.C. with Dan Quinn. You lose the Dorrance Armstrongs of the world on the D-line. And those are the type of guys where you start to see erosion of deeper lines on both the offense and defensive line. They've got to shore that up. But Jerry he can't do anything else at this stage to make the Cowboys look dramatically different than the way they look on paper now. Look, still going to be a good football team. It's a good football team. I'm a little bit worried about the running game and what that's going to look like. You got Zeke back, but look, I didn't think Zeke had to go in the first place. They just were paying him too much. Now you got him on a team-friendly contract that you can afford. You're going to kick the tires on a guy like Royce Freeman. We'll figure out what he has. I don't love that, but I do trust Dak at this stage that they'll be able to. Mike McCarthy, I actually trust Big Mike, as I call him, as a play caller. And Mike Zimmer, I was a big Dan Quinn fan. I liked the way Dan Quinn called defense. But you know what he is? I'm not using this as a knock, but this is just who he is. Dan Quinn is a player's coach. Players love him. Players don't love Zim. I like that. Zim's going to get on you. You know what? He's going to get on you. And that guy he's going to get on is 11. It's going to be about Micah Parsons. And I think Micah, if you go back to the playoff game against the Packers, when we needed him to be great, he was lost in space. He will not be lost in space this year with Mike Zimmer. A lot of that is going to be about star-driven power for the Cowboys. If the stars play like stars, they'll be right there. If they take a step back, they won't.
Last couple ones before we get you out of here. Anything in UFC you like coming up this week?
Oh my God, yes. UFC 302 in New. Are you going to go? How far is Newark for you? Can you drive down to Newark?
Not that far, but I'm actually going to be at the Mets game June 1st.
Oh my God, what are you doing with your life? Why are you choosing to go see?
Got free tickets.
Okay. So you
the
didn't
baseball games too. You go to any baseball game, minor league baseball game, major league. Nothing like going to baseball in person.
Hey, do me a favor when you go. Can you boo for me?
Yes, sure.
Just
I might get
give me
in the bat
one
at this
boo.
point. I might get in the bat. Might get to play left field. Who knows?
I think you're playing in the 5th inning. I do love UFC 302 this week at Newark. Of course, the main event is Islam Makhachev against Dustin the Diamond Poirier. You know, I'm looking at those numbers and I see Poirier is over a $4 betting underdog. You got to lay over 5 here if you want the champion at 155 pounds. Here's the worry for me. You and I talk about it in golf betting all the time, like betting against Scotty Scheffler, right? There's no value in it for Islam at this point for me in this main event. And I've listened to the Diamond a lot. And he says, I'm going to stun everybody because I'm going to knock him out. That's what he says he's going to do. He's going to knock out Islam Makhachev. And before we make the lazy comparisons, and a lot of people do that in MMA, they go, Islam is the second coming of Abid Nurmagomedov, who of course trains with, all that stuff. They are completely different fighters as champions in the same weight class at 155 pounds. You go back to the Habib days, he never shot for a takedown in space. Everything he did was get you up against the fence, look for a double leg takedown, and then control you on the ground. Islam is a willing participant with the hands. And so, Will, what that says to me is if he's willing in a big octagon at Newark to be in space for a little bit with the diamond, good luck. Like, that gives you a live dog scenario. So I think the Poirier side here should be encouraged by that. And I think what will happen is if Islam doesn't like the hands game with Dustin, then he'll look for a takedown. But if the diamond hurts Islam Makhachev with the hands, the new term now, I want to get a t-shirt that says jump the gilly. He's going to jump a guillotine. He's going to look to sink in a guillotine choke against Islam Makhachev and jump that gilly at some point. Problem is, if you can't secure the gilly and the head pops out, now you're on the bottom with Islam Makhachev on top. The only way I'd play this is Islam Makhachev inside the distance, and I'd look for the diamond two-way action there, either submission or with a this fight's not going the cards. The over right now is set at 2.5. I actually like the under a little bit, 2.5 rounds. I think you can find some value there because somebody's going out. And I got to be honest with you, I think it's probably 60-40 Makhachev in that equation. But Will, I think we got a live dog. I'll probably end up being on the diamond before we get to Saturday night in Newark in some way, shape, or form.
Last one, U.S. Open a couple weeks away here in golf. Anything you're eyeing, anybody you're interested in is just Scheffler and don't bother betting anybody else. How are you going to attack it?
You know, I got this guy. He hosts a podcast called Shoulda Bet More, Will Hill, and he found a ridiculously good number on a guy named Sahith Theegala at 90-1. And he texts me and he's like, hey, you want in? I'm like, you damn right I want in. 90-1? Will, you're finding numbers. Look, do I think Theegala can win? I do. He was right there at the PGA Championship, as we saw. And as I was texting you, I didn't want him to win last week. Sometimes you get a taste of that competition in major championships as a younger player like Sahith. I think he'll be around. The problem is when you get to a course like Pinehurst, and I've been to Pinehurst, I was there back in the 90s, God rest his soul, when Payne Stewart won that year, watched the young Phil Mickelson battle it out and the young Tiger Woods, and Payne won that week. These are going to be narrow fairways at Pinehurst. And what they're legendary for is their tabletop greens. And so what I'm hoping, as somebody that does not like to play the short favorites like a Scotty Scheffler, it's going to be the putter. Now, Scotty Scheffler's putter has been much better since Rory McIlroy told him to go to a mallet putter. So I'll forever hate Rory McIlroy for giving advice to the already best player in the world. And now he's gotten better with the putter because of Rory's recommendation. Tough greens at Pinehurst. Watch out for the hot putters of the world. Let me give you a live player that would fit that category, who is also a major championship, the Australian, Cameron Smith. Cam Smith, he can be streaky hot with a putter on lightning fast greens like you're going to have at Pinehurst. Those are the type of guys I want. I want the best putter for 4 days. And normally that's not Scotty Scheffler. So best ball striker, absolutely Scotty. But I think the tougher greens, this would be the toughest one of the majors for Scotty to win.
Dave, you've answered all my questions. You were great. I don't know what took me so long to get you on here, but I appreciate you coming on.
When are we going to do the buddy cop, twins movie, me and you? Because you're like 6'4".
Maybe, I mean, summer is usually a slower time. So maybe in the summer we can revisit that. Dave, let everyone know where they can find you, man. I appreciate it.
You can find me on X at DRoss Sports, also on IG at the same handle. Yes, that's 3 S's in a row. No, I did not pay Elon Musk extra for the 3 S's.
Dave, appreciate it, man. Hopefully we'll do this again down the road. Thanks for coming on.
Anytime, Will. Thanks, bro.
All right, that will do it. Thank you to Dave Ross. We'll be back middle of the week. Talk more playoffs, talk more baseball. See you guys then.